When digital restoration expert Dr. Sarachin zoomed in on an old 1899 photo at extremely high magnification in 2019, she froze in shock. For more than a century, people believed the image showed a woman and her young daughter standing in a garden, hand in hand. It looked like a sweet family portrait from the Victorian era. But the new high-resolution scan uncovered something that made Sarah immediately contact the police archives. The woman in that picture had already been dead for 3 weeks when the photograph was taken. What seemed like a warm family moment was actually tied to one of the most unsettling cases in Victorian England, and the child in the photo had no idea what she was holding on to. The first signs of trouble came from the neighbors. It was August 15th, 1899, in London's Whitechapel district, an area already known for the Jack the Ripper crimes more than a decade earlier. The summer heat made the overcrowded buildings feel even more stifling, but the smell coming from the ground floor of 47, Thrall Street, was unlike anything the residents were used to. It had a sickly, sweet, rotten scent, and beneath that, something far more alarming. Eleanor Blackwood, who lived upstairs, finally went to police that morning. She told Constable William Morris that she had smelled it for 3 weeks and had not seen Miss Hartley, the woman in the flat, leave the apartment once. She also mentioned hearing Miss Hartley's daughter Emma talking inside, even though the girl had not been outside in days. Eleanor was sure something was wrong. Constable Morris and Sergeant James Petton arrived at the building around 10 in the morning. They knocked on the door with no reply, then knocked again more firmly. After a moment, they heard small footsteps and a child's voice. The girl said her mother told her not to open the door. The officers asked where her mother was, and the child answered that her mother was right beside her, holding her hand. The two officers exchanged a worried look. Sergeant Petton pushed against the old wooden door, and it broke open on his second attempt. Inside, the room was dim and cramped. 7-year-old Emma Hartley stood in the center, wearing a dirty dress. Her hair was tangled, her face was thin, and her eyes seemed too big for a small frame. She was holding the hand of a woman, sitting in a wooden chair next to her. The woman wore a dark dress with a high collar. Her head leaned to one side. Her eyes were open but lifeless, and her skin had changed color and was beginning to come apart. Flies covered her face. The room was filled with a heavy smell of decay. Emma looked up calmly and said her mother had been very tired and needed to rest. She said she had been waiting for her to wake up. Constable Morris stepped back into the hallway and became sick. Sergeant Petton knelt down carefully and asked Emma how long her mother had been resting. Emma tried to think about it and said it happened right after her birthday. She said she lost track of the days but remembered they had a cake, and after that her mother sat down and went to sleep and never woke up. Her mother had told her not to let go of her hand, so she hadn't. Emma had stayed alone with her mother's body for 3 weeks, still holding her hand. 2 days before the police entered the flat, something unusual had happened. On August 13th, 1899, a man named Thomas Whitmore showed up at the door. He was a traveling photographer who worked in postmortem photography, a common practice at the time. Because photos were expensive and life was often short, many families only had one picture of loved ones, sometimes taken after they pass away. Photographers often arranged the bodies to appear as if they were still alive. Thomas had received a letter 4 days earlier. A young messenger delivered it, saying a woman had paid him to bring it. The handwriting was neat but simple. In the letter, a woman named A. Hartley said she was very sick and did not expect to survive. She asked Thomas to take one last photo of her with her daughter Emma before she died. She instructed him to come on August 13th at 2 in the afternoon, said she would leave payment under the doormat, and told him to knock twice and enter. She said they would be waiting in the garden behind the building. The request was strange but not completely out of the ordinary, and the payment she offered was generous. Thomas assumed she wanted the photograph taken before she became too ill to pose comfortably. He arrived at the address right on time with his camera. The building looked worn down and the neighborhood felt rough, but the payment he found under the mat matched what the letter promised. He knocked twice as instructed. No one answered. Following the directions in the letter, he tried the door. It was unlocked. He slowly pushed it open. Thomas stepped inside and called out, "Hello, Miss Hartley." The strong, sweet, rotten smell hit him right away. He had worked around death for 15 years and recognized the scent of a body that had been gone for some time. He assumed Miss Hartley had already passed and that someone in the home wanted a photograph taken quickly before burial. He called out again and heard a small voice from outside. "We're in the garden. Mama said you would come." Thomas walked to the flat, breathing through his mouth to block the smell, and stepped out into a small garden surrounded by tall brick walls. There, standing in a patch of sunlight, was a girl in a pale dress holding the hand of a woman sitting in a chair. The woman was positioned carefully, turned slightly toward the garden. She wore a dark dress and a broad hat that shaded her face. Her other hand rested still in her lap. She didn't move at all. The girl smiled brightly at Thomas. "Mama's ready for her picture. She said it's very important. She said you have to take it just like this, with us holding hands. She said I must never let go." Thomas set up his camera. The scene, with the afternoon light and the overgrown roses behind them, looked peaceful. The woman's stillness worked well for the long exposure time. He didn't question why she hadn't spoken. He assumed she had already passed away and had been positioned by someone who wanted a final memory. That was the kind of work he often did. He took the photograph, packed his equipment, and left, unaware of what he had actually captured. 2 days later, on August 15th, when Sergeant Pettine gently pulled Emma away from her mother's body, the child screamed with heartbreaking pain. It wasn't fear but the feeling of breaking a promise she believed she had to keep. Despite her frail condition, she fought to reach her mother's hand again. No, Mama said never let go. I promised. I have to hold her hand, or she won't wake up. Let me go, Mama." Both officers had to carry her out as she sobbed. Upstairs, Mrs. Blackwood took her in, washed her, and tried to feed her soup, but Emma wouldn't touch it. She stared down at the floor and whispered, "I let go. I wasn't supposed to let go." Downstairs, investigators began their work. Dr. Harold Greaves, the police surgeon, confirmed that 31-year-old Adelaide Hartley had been dead for about 3 weeks, matching what Emma had said about her birthday on July 25th. He believed she had died from morphine poisoning. An empty bottle of laudanum and a teacup with dried residue were found beside the chair. Laudanum, a common pain medicine at the time, could stop breathing if taken in large amounts. What they found next changed the case entirely. Tucked under Adelaide's folded hand was a letter. The paper was stained but still readable. Sergeant Pettine opened it carefully. It read, "To whoever finds this, I am Adelaide Hartley. I am dying of consumption, and the pain has become too much. I have taken laudanum to end my suffering. I know this is wrong, but I cannot continue. My daughter Emma is 7 and has no one else. I arranged for one last photograph with her. The photographer will come on August 13th. Emma believes I am only sleeping. I told her she must hold my hand and never let go until someone comes. Someone will come eventually. Please tell Emma I am sorry. Please tell her I loved her. Please tell her it was not her fault that I could not wake up. Take care, my girl. She deserves better than what I could give." July 25th, 1899. Sergeant Pettine's hands shook as he finished reading. Adelaide had planned everything herself. She wrote the photographer, arranged the payment, placed the coins under the doormat, and set herself in the exact position she wanted the photograph. Then she told her daughter to hold her hand and keep holding it until help arrived. For 3 weeks, Emma lived in the small room with her mother's body, eating the little food left out for her, drinking water from the tap, and sleeping on the floor beside the chair. She never let go of her mother's hand. Even as the smell worsened and the body changed, she stayed because that was the last instruction her mother gave her. When the photographer arrived on August 13th, Emma led him outside while still holding her mother's hand. She stood where her mother had told her to stand. She smiled because people smile for photos. And Thomas Whitmore unknowingly took a picture of a child holding hands with her mother, who had been gone 19 days. The photo looked like a peaceful family moment, but the truth behind it was far from that. The story reached the newspapers in less than a day. The headlines were dramatic and drew immediate attention. Some readers judged Adelaide for leaving her daughter in such a situation, while others saw her as a mother facing unbearable pain who tried to create one final memory with her child. The case spread quickly through newspapers, churches, and even government discussions. People argued about the morality of taking one's own life, the responsibilities of parents, and what would happen to young Emma. But investigators focused on something else that didn't sit right with them. How had Adelaide planned everything so precisely? How did she know exactly when she would pass? And how did she time a photographer's visit to fall 2 weeks after her death? Detective Inspector Arthur Wickham was assigned to look into the case. The more he uncovered about Adelaide's final weeks, the more troubling the situation became. Adelaide had worked as a seamstress from her small home, barely earning enough to support herself and her daughter. She had been diagnosed with advanced tuberculosis earlier, in 1899. By midsummer, she was coughing blood and struggling to work. She had no family to turn to, no savings, and no way to care for Emma once she was gone. Wickham learned that Adelaide had spent her last weeks making detailed preparations. On July 10th, she visited 3 different chemists and bought small amounts of laudanum from each so she would not attract attention. She gathered enough for a fatal dose. On July 15th, she wrote to Thomas Whitmore about the memorial photograph and paid him in advance using borrowed money. She knew she would not live to repay. On July 20th, she gently told Emma that she would soon take a long sleep and that Emma must hold her hand until someone arrived to help them. She framed it as a special task, asking, "Can you stay beside me and hold my hand no matter how long it takes?" On July 25th, Emma's 7th birthday, Adelaide gave her a small cake she had saved for her. They celebrated together. Later that day, Adelaide took the laudanum, arranged herself in the garden chair in the exact position she wanted, held Emma's hand, and died. One detail weighed heavily on Detective Wickham's mind. Adelaide had planned the timing with astonishing accuracy. She understood how quickly a body would change in the warm weather. She likely knew neighbors would notice the smell after some time. She may have believed that if Emma were found too soon, the scene would be even more shocking for the child. But if Emma were found after the photograph had been taken, there would be a final picture of them together. Perhaps, in her mind, that picture would give Emma something comforting to hold on to in the future. And her timing worked. Thomas Whitmore took the photograph on August 13th. Police arrived 2 days later, on August 15th. Everything had unfolded exactly the way Adelaide had planned. Inspector Wickham later wrote that he had never seen such a mixture of careful planning and emotional complexity. The act seemed both deeply loving and deeply harmful. He wrote in his notes that the emotional effect on Emma would likely last her entire life. On August 17th, 2 days after the discovery, Thomas Whitmore went to the police. He had read about the case and was shaken by the truth. "I photographed a dead woman," he told Wickham. "I posed a child with her mother, and I didn't know. I truly thought it was just a memorial picture. I never imagined she had been gone for weeks." Wickham asked to see the photograph. Thomas had already developed it on the day he took it. Planning to send it to the address as instructed, he handed it to the inspector with trembling hands. The photograph showed what witnesses later described: a young girl in a pale dress, standing in a small garden, holding the hand of a woman seated in a chair. The woman's face was slightly turned aside and hidden under the shadow of her hat. Roses climbed up the brick wall behind them. Soft afternoon light fell across the scene. At first glance, it looked like a normal portrait from the era. But when Wickham studied it with a magnifying glass, the disturbing details became clear. The woman's hand, the one Emma was holding, showed dark patches that hinted at decomposition. The shape of the dress over her body looked uneven because of the swelling that occurs after death. And there were tiny dark specks around her clothing and in the air that, under close inspection, were flies captured during long exposure. Emma, however, appeared calm and unaware, looking toward the camera with a faint, serious expression typical of the time. Her fingers were laced tightly with her mother's. Wickham ordered that the photo be sealed within the case file, not displayed publicly. It was too distressing for general viewing, but it also held historical importance. It appeared to be the only known image of a living person posing with someone who had passed away without realizing it. Post-mortem photos were common in the Victorian era, but everyone involved normally understood the circumstances. This was entirely different. Later, another detail came to light that made the image even more unsettling. When the body was moved from the garden chair, investigators found marks on Adelaide's wrist. She had tied her hand to the armrest before she died to ensure it stayed in place, even as her body changed. She had done this so that the pose she wanted would remain intact when the photographer arrived. She had even accounted for what would happen as her body decomposed. She had planned for every detail, and her plan worked. The photograph turned out exactly the way she wanted. A final picture of a mother and her daughter standing together, hands joined in warm afternoon light. Anyone looking at it would assume it was a normal portrait. No one would imagine that one of them had already been gone for weeks. For 120 years, the photograph stayed locked away in Scotland Yard's archives. It was mentioned from time to time in psychology studies and Victorian history discussions as an example of a carefully planned suicide and the emotional impact it left on a child. But almost no one saw the image itself. The few researchers who viewed it said it was too unsettling to publish. In 2019, Dr. Sarah Chun, a digital restoration expert at University College London, received permission to study Scotland Yard's historical photography collection. She focused on Victorian-era photography, especially memorial portraits. When she scanned the Hartley photograph using modern forensic imaging tools, she saw something the original investigators could not have detected. Under the brim of Adelaide's hat, barely visible even at extreme magnification, was her face. Victorian viewers had been shielded from the details by shadows and the angle of her head. But digital enhancement showed what the photograph truly captured. Adelaide's eyes had sunk inward. Her mouth hung slightly open. The skin on her face had pulled away, giving her a hollow, changed look. But there was something else. Something that made Dr. Chin call Scotland Yard immediately. Restoration work revealed a second piece of paper in Adelaide's lap, hidden by her hand and the folds of her dress. It had never been found during the original investigation. Using an enhanced scan, forensic specialists were able to read the writing on this hidden note. It was dated August 12, 1899, one day before the photograph was taken, and nearly 3 weeks after Adelaide had died. The letter read, "Emma, if you read this, it means you made it through. It means you held on. It means someone found you. I'm so sorry, my sweet girl. You don't understand right now. You think I'm resting. You think if you hold my hand tight enough, I'll wake up, but I won't. I'm gone. What I put you through cannot be excused, but I felt trapped. I was already dying. I couldn't bear the thought of you being alone without food after I passed naturally. This way, help will come sooner. This way, you'll have a picture of us together. Something to keep. Hold my hand, Emma. Not to wake me, but to keep us close for a little longer. I love you. I'm sorry. If you can, forgive me. Mama." The date on the letter didn't match the known timeline. Adelaide had died on July 25th. This letter was dated August 12th. That meant someone had placed a note in her lap. During the 3 weeks, the flat was locked and Emma was inside alone. But who? Emma couldn't write. The door had been locked from the inside. No one entered except the photographer on August 13th, and he reported nothing unusual. Investigators re-examined the photograph. The letter was clearly visible in the original image under magnification. It had been there on the day the picture was taken. It wasn't added later. It wasn't part of a trick. That left 2 possibilities. Either the letter was written after Adelaide's death, or someone else had entered the flat without being noticed during those 3 weeks. The case remains open. The photograph is still stored in the archives, now marked with note reading, "Unresolved details." Ongoing review. Emma went on to live with a distant relative in Manchester. She married in 1912, raised 3 children, and passed away in 1964 at the age of 72. She never discussed what happened in the flat. Her daughter later said that even in old age, Emma would sometimes reach out in her sleep as if holding an invisible hand. In 2023, a paranormal research group requested access to the image. They said new analysis methods showed unusual patterns around the seated figure that couldn't be explained by photographic flaws or natural decay. Scotland Yard declined the request. The photograph remains sealed. Some historical puzzles are left as they are. Some memories stay untouched. And some images preserve more than faces and shadows. They preserve the lengths someone might go to in order to stay close to the person they love. The story of Adelaide and Emma Hartley leaves behind more than a sad event from the past. It raises questions that have never been answered, and it reminds us how complicated people can be when they are scared, sick, or running out of options. Adelaide planned everything with care, tried to leave her daughter a final moment of closeness. At the same time, her plan placed Emma in a situation no child should ever experience. It was an act shaped by fear, love, pain, and confusion all at once. That mix is what makes the case so difficult to understand and impossible to categorize. The photograph, sealed away for so long, became more than a record of a single moment. It turned into a piece of history that connected investigators, researchers, and future generations to a mother and child who lived through circumstances we can barely imagine today. Every person who studied the case saw something different in it. Some saw the actions of a mother trying to protect her child in the only way she believed she could. Others focused on the impact her choices had on Emma, who spent 3 weeks believing she needed to keep holding her mother's hand no matter what. Both viewpoints reveal something real about the pressures families faced during the Victorian era, especially those with limited resources and no support. When Dr. Chen's digital scan uncovered details hidden for more than a century, the photograph gained new attention. Instead of closing the case, the enhanced image opened new questions. It showed a second letter no one had known about. It showed details of the scene that the original investigators could not have seen. And it pushed the case from a carefully planned end-of-life decision into something more complex. The new letter's date did not match the timeline, and no one has been able to explain how the note appeared in a locked room. That detail changed the direction of the investigation. It also reminded historians how easily old evidence can surprise us when technology improves. Even with these new discoveries, one part of the story remained steady. Emma survived. She grew up, created a family of her own, and lived a long life. She never chose to speak publicly about those 3 weeks in 1899, and people have respected that silence. Her life after the event became a quiet testimony that a person can move forward even after experiencing something deeply confusing or frightening at a young age. The small stories her family shared later, like the way she sometimes reached out in her sleep as though holding a hand, were gentle reminders of how memories stay with us. The Hartley photograph continues to be handled with care. Modern researchers still debate its meaning, and requests to view it are treated seriously. The image has turned into a rare window into the past that shows how determined families can be when facing hardship. It also highlights how much remains unknown about human behavior when people feel cornered by illness or fear. In the end, the case stands as a historical reminder of how fragile life was in that era, how strong the bond between a parent and child can be, and how a single photograph can carry more weight than anyone ever expected. The unanswered questions remain, but so does the understanding that behind every old image is a real story, shaped by real people who lived through challenges we may never fully comprehend.